Once upon a time in a small village, there lived a beautiful and kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. She lived with her cruel stepmother and two stepsisters who treated her as their servant. Cinderella's days were filled with endless chores, while her stepsisters enjoyed a life of luxury. Despite her difficult circumstances, Cinderella remained resilient and optimistic. She found solace in the company of animals and would often spend time talking to them. Her dearest friends were the birds that nested near her home and a family of mice that lived in the attic. One day, an invitation arrived at their doorstep. The king was hosting a grand ball at the palace, and every young lady in the kingdom was invited. Cinderella's stepsisters were ecstatic as they dreamed of marrying the prince and becoming princesses. They spent days preparing their outfits, trying on dresses, and practicing their dance moves. Cinderella longed to attend the ball too, but her stepmother forbade her from going, knowing that she would outshine her own daughters. As Cinderella watched her stepsisters getting ready, tears welled up in her eyes. She retreated to her room, feeling utterly hopeless. Just when Cinderella thought all hope was lost, a magical fairy appeared before her. With a wave of her wand, she transformed Cinderella's torn and ragged dress into a magnificent gown, complete with delicate glass slippers. The fairy also summoned a magnificent carriage, pulled by 6 white horses. "You shall go to the ball, Cinderella," said the fairy. "But remember, the magic will only last until midnight. You must leave the palace before the clock strikes 12, or everything will return to its original form." Overwhelmed with joy, Cinderella thanked the fairy and set off for the palace. As she entered the ballroom, all eyes turned to her. The prince himself was captivated by her beauty and grace. They danced together all evening, forgetting about the passing time. Just as the clock was about to strike midnight, Cinderella remembered the fairy's warning. She quickly slipped away from the prince's grasp and rushed out of the palace. In her haste, she accidentally left one of her glass slippers behind on the grand staircase. Days turned into weeks, and the prince couldn't get Cinderella out of his mind. He was determined to find the girl whose foot fit the glass slipper. The prince's herald traveled throughout the kingdom, inviting every young woman to try on the slipper. When the herald arrived at Cinderella's house, her stepsisters eagerly tried to force their feet into the tiny slipper, but it was no use. The slipper was too small for them. Cinderella, who had been locked in her room by her stepmother, managed to free herself and made her way downstairs. As Cinderella approached the herald, her stepsisters sneered at her, mocking the idea that she could be the girl the prince was searching for. But when Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper, it fit perfectly. The prince's heart skipped a beat as he realized that he had found his true love. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were left in disbelief as Cinderella stepped forward, transformed from a servant into a radiant princess. The prince took her hand and asked her to be his wife. Cinderella accepted with tears of joy streaming down her face. And so Cinderella and the prince were married in a grand wedding ceremony. Cinderella forgave her stepmother and stepsisters, inviting them to live in the palace and promising to treat them with kindness. From that day forward, Cinderella's days of hardship were replaced with a life filled with love, happiness, and the promise of a happily ever after.